Hello, I'm Ronald Day, Associate Vice President of the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy, and welcome to Both Sides of the Bars, a discussion-driven show that examines the criminal justice system from various perspectives, including from those most impacted by the criminal justice system. We discuss critical questions about how the current system works, its intersections with social justice, and highlight the efforts that are being made to improve the lives of everyone that is affected by it. We ask you, the viewer, to spread the word about Both Sides of the Bars and share your comments with us on Twitter at The Fortune Society. Today, we have with us Ashley and Mujahid. So I'm going to read your bios. So Ashley Demyan is a research associate at the Center on Sentencing and Corrections at the Vera Institute. And Ashley joined Vera in April 2013. She is currently serving as the lead researcher for 2 sites participating in the Safe Alternatives to Segregation Initiative. Ashley has a PhD in criminology, law, and society from the University of California, Irvine. Her past research includes a qualitative study of a prison dog program at a minimum security facility in Ohio, a mixed methods examination of the evolution and use of medical, parole, compassionate release with the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, and a GIS-based collaboration linking data provided by local criminal justice agencies and the Legal Aid Society of Orange County to map domestic violence hotspots in Santa Ana, California. Sounds like an exciting study.
It was.
And next we have, again, Mujahid. No, Farid. Mr. Farid your program is based at the Correctional Association of New York, right? And it's called Releasing Aging People in Prison. And your title is?
Lead Organizer.
Lead Organizer. So Farid is the founding member of Prisoners for Age Counseling and Education, which is a fantastic program that is still running in a lot of New York State correctional facilities. So thank you for doing that. And helped design prison-based sociology and theology courses that allowed others to earn college-credited certificates and transition into more structured higher education opportunities. Since his release in 2011, Farid has worked at the Correctional Association of New York. During his more than 30 years of incarceration in New York State, Farid earned 4 college degrees and other certifications, including his paralegal certificate, New York State Department of Labor certificate in Human Development Counseling, New York City Department of Human Health certificate in HIV/AIDS, and I'm sure there's a host of other certificates that you earned, but you didn't want me to be here reading this for 10 minutes. So thank you, Ashley and Mujahid, for being on Both Sides of the Bars. Today we're going to be talking about a critical issue, one that is very important for the Fortune Society. We did a newsletter recently on aging in the criminal justice system. And so, again, we're excited to have you here today, 2 experts to talk about your particular experiences. So I'm going to start by not assuming that people who in viewer land actually know about the issue of aging. So I would like for you both to frame the discussion so that if someone had no idea about this issue of aging in prison, and particularly about its impact and cost benefits and so forth, I'd like for them to get an understanding, and then we could go a little deeper into some of the issues. So why don't we start with you, Ashley?
Okay, so I think the biggest thing that we should maybe start out with is the definition of an aging prisoner.
Yes.
So in broader society, aging generally, the cutoff is maybe 65 years old.
I'm considered an old person when I turn 65.
Yeah,
right?
Yes, with the AARP and all of Social Security, all of those benefits that are kicking in. Within prison, the age cutoff is much younger. So there have been multiple studies that suggest that people who have spent long terms in prison are physiologically 7 to 10 years older than their chronological age. Yes. And so a lot of state departments of corrections are lowering the definition of aging prisoner to 50, 55, 60. And so when we talk about the term aging prisoner, we're really talking about those prisoners as well. So the National Institute of Corrections actually recommends defining aging prisoners starting at 50. Okay. That is the lower end. I think it's more, it's a lower age than a lot of state departments are comfortable with, but you know, it can go generally between 50 and 60 is what states are using.
Okay, thank you for that. And won't you help us to, Mujahid, frame the conversation so that our viewers understand this particular topic?
First, I'd like to thank you for inviting me here, giving us this opportunity to talk a little bit about this subject.
Yes, it's
our
our pleasure.
I want to thank Ashley for laying that framework of exactly what an aging person is.
Exactly.
I want to approach it, the framing of this from the point of why we see people aging in prison.
Yes.
And the reason that the fundamental reason we see it is because it's tied into this punishment paradigm that's going on in this country. Yes. The propensity to punish. Yes. Aging people in prison, when you talk about aging people in prison, it's usually associated with people that is convicted of serious offenses, violent crimes, so to speak. And these are the people who are considered the worst of the worst, the irredeemable. And once they are in the grasp of the criminal justice system, it's hard, difficult, and sometimes impossible for them to extricate themselves from that system. Got it. And this is the reason we see it. Even parole systems throughout the country, especially in New York, have been co-opted by this punishment paradigm. And parole boards are no longer performing the function of determining whether or not a person is a risk after they have served a specific period of time, a risk to be released, but they're performing the function of extending punishments.
Thank you for that. So, Ashley, what are some specific considerations that are unique for individuals that are incarcerated that are aging versus those who are younger, more healthier? We know that generally it costs more, right, to incarcerate people as they get older. I mean, there are all these medical needs and so forth, but tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think institutions generally are built around providing programming and the housing and all of the needs for younger, healthier, able-bodied individuals. And so as people age in prison, suddenly there's housing considerations, so the need for more lower bunks, grab bars and showers and toilets. There are special considerations with security incidences. So, if you're told to get down, someone who is aging might not be able to do that in terms of programming and employment. So there are certain jobs that become difficult. And so there are just a lot of considerations that go into housing an aging population. And then in terms of medical care, aging prisoners are much more likely to have chronic and contagious diseases and infections. And so when they do have an illness, it's likely to be more serious and cost more money. There are more complications. And so there are two problems for departments of corrections with that, in that, one, it clogs up the in-prison healthcare system for people who are seeking treatment for more minor illnesses. And then the cost of providing treatment outside of prison, there are guarding costs and transportation costs that really exacerbate treatment outside. So those are really kind of what drive the cost of healthcare.
Got it. And you are in a unique position in that you served an extensive amount of time in prison, 33 years. Yes. And then now you're advocating on behalf of individuals that are aging in the prison system. So can you tell us about, because Ashley again framed it and talked about the medical issues that people have, and tell us about your experience.
Yes, as you noted, I am a formerly incarcerated person. Yes. I I was released in 2011 after serving 33 years. I actually entered the system in 1978 with a sentence of 15 years to life.
Yes.
For those that are not aware, New York still has, it had been, and it still has components of what's called an indeterminate sentence structure. And an indeterminate sentence means that you have a minimum imposed and a maximum.
Yes.
And with the most serious offenses, that maximum is usually life.
Life,
With
yes.
what's called A1 offenses.
Yes.
I was convicted of a A1 offense. And so I had life on the end, but I had the actual least amount that the minimum could be, which is 15.
Yes.
On those type of sentences, it was usually 15 as a minimum, 20 or 25.
Yes.
And so I was sentenced to 15 years to life. And I just want to note that those sentences philosophically implied that a person could be rehabilitated. That's the philosophy behind those type of sentences.
Because the judge could have given you 25.
Yeah, not only that, the whole sentencing structure itself
Yes.
of imposing a minimum and a maximum implies to look at a person
Potential.
at that minimum
Yes.
and make a determination as to whether or not they continue to present a risk to society. And if not, and if they've been rehabilitated, that the parole process should release them.
Yes.
That's the whole philosophy behind the indeterminate sentence structure.
Okay.
And so a lot of people was in the system with those type of sentences. I had that type of sentence. And I appeared at the parole board at that 15-year minimum.
Yes.
Had made major achievements, all of the things that you read off there.
Yes.
I had achieved those within that 15-year period, the 4 degrees, et cetera, the involvement in programs,
Yes.
and none of that mattered. From that point in 1993, I began getting 2-year denials, a sequence of 2-year denials, and wound up going to 10 parole boards over an 18-year period. And the reason for the denials was that the nature of the offense. That's what the parole process usually cites. And it's obvious that the nature of the offense was something that I could never change.
Sure.
I can add, while I'm speaking, I guess, that I was fortunate to be as a result of being engaged in the educational process, I understood that this was not something personal.
Yes.
I knew that this was something that was going on as a policy across the board. It was having an impact on many others. And as a result of that, I was able to somewhat analyze this whole process as a participant observer.
Yeah.
And it had less of a devastating impact on me because of that.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, there are policies that allow for release for individuals that are aging or that have health-related issues. We have them in New York State, we have them around the country. I mean, what we've seen is that the government and parole boards have been very reluctant to release people. But what are some of those policies that currently exist, Ashley?
So as legislated, there are a number of policies. I think all but 2 or 3 states have some form of release for either aging prisoners or terminally ill or infirm individuals. The tricky thing is, first, that they're all called by different names. And so it's really hard to know, based on what state you're in, what that state's policy is called. So sometimes they're called compassionate release, medical parole, medical clemency, geriatric release. And so there's not one term that you could search for and find the policy easily, which makes it very hard for both incarcerated people and their loved ones to know the eligibility requirements or how to initiate the process to even get that ball rolling. The second issue is that you touched upon is the reluctance of the parole boards to use these policies. So it seems that state legislatures who are making the laws are open to these policies as a way to reduce incarceration costs and manage an aging population. Sadly, the people who are making the decisions, the parole boards, the sentencing judges, state commissioners, are reluctant to take that chance on a large number of individuals who are eligible. And so that's resulting in very few people being released under these policies nationally.
Thank you. And Mujahid, you mentioned the issue of violence earlier. And so we know that some commissioners are fearful of releasing people. We know that many states have risk assessment tools that they actually use to determine if a person poses a public safety risk when they release. Oftentimes in New York State, we know that these risk assessments often determine that a person is a very low risk, but the parole boards are still extremely reluctant to release people. And a lot of it has to do with, I don't want to release someone and the person commits a crime and then my name is on the front page of the New York Post or something like that. What do you have to say to that particular issue?
I would say that just as a person who comes up for parole as a result of serving that minimum term, finds himself confronting a parole process that's pretty much centered on extending punishment, that you're going to find the same thing with someone that's applying for compassionate release. That you got the same parole board that considers parole, considering these petitions for compassionate release and medical parole. And I don't think much changes, as a result of that, how the request for release is being submitted.
Got it. And I was reading an article recently that talked about how people who have long sentences and are aging are not a priority in any of these correctional systems. That the focus is often on people who are going to be released and oftentimes released relatively soon. So that people go sometimes years without being involved in programs sometimes and having access to some of the services that they need. So we were talking earlier about certain gaps. What are some of the gaps that need to be addressed in this area?
Well, I think one of the most pressing issues is recognizing the burdens of the continued incarceration of aging individuals. And so they do, kind of maybe fall through the cracks with programming and especially reentry planning, age-appropriate reentry planning, and ensuring they have appropriate services and access to medical care on the outside. But I feel like we might be at a tipping point now just in terms of the population of aging individuals behind bars. We're at a point where it's essentially the number is doubling every 5 years. And so the trajectory of aging individuals is skyrocketing while the overall prison system is, increasing maybe a few percent a year. And so we're at that point where we either need to build additional institutions to house medically ill or terminally ill, or just those individuals who need the special accommodations, or we need to look at release policies. But we really do need to work on specific reentry planning and planning for these people to be released.
In your organization, RAP, can you tell us about some of the advocacy work that you're actually doing to ensure that this is addressed?
One of the main things we're doing, we're trying to educate the public, as well as public officials and legislators about the contradictions inherent in what's going on. Like, for instance, you mentioned the risk assessments. One of the things we discovered as we started researching to engage in our work was that the population that we was focusing on had the lowest rate of risk for recidivism.
Sure, exactly.
One of the things that you'll find is that that age, as a person age, they're less likely to engage in crime and less likely to recidivate upon release. But not only that, another thing we discovered that seems counterintuitive is that people convicted of violent crimes are usually the less likely to recidivate also. People who serve long periods of incarceration, education, the population, a lot of these factors that fed into this population that we were serving made them the lowest of risk for recidivism, the very lowest of risk, and yet these were the people that were least likely to be paroled. And so what we're trying to point out is that what's going on here is not in the interest of public safety, that it's purely political, and that we need some people in power who are responsible to take charge and try to change the trajectory of what's going on here.
Yeah, I mean, you make the point that if a person is set up as the boogeyman, then the question of public safety is not really what's the concern. It's, people
as it should be, though.
As it should be, of course. I mean, we want, if you say that you develop a risk assessment to determine if someone poses a risk once they're released, and then you totally, just say, we did it, but it just becomes routine. It doesn't really mean anything. It's really unfortunate that that happens. So I think pointing out these contradictions, putting the light on exactly what's going on, is very important. Yes, exactly. And so Vera is also doing some work around aging right now. You want to tell us what you're doing?
So we had a report published in 2010 that it's about time, and it was focusing on geriatric prisoners and geriatric release laws around the country. And so we are working to update that and to make that more current and to expand it to look at all the laws and policies that allow for release of either aging or terminally ill or infirm individuals.
Got it. And so in New York State, we know that again, it's been very challenging, right? One thing is that the crime rate has gone down, right? And the prison population has gone down. But you mentioned, Ashley, that aging prisoners, individuals that are incarcerated for violent crimes and so forth, the number keeps going up pretty significantly.
In
so
New York,
we want to address...
in New York State, one of the other things we noted was that although over the last 12 years, the overall population was reduced by 23%.
Yes.
During that same 12-year period, the population of people 50 years of age and older went up 84%.
Yeah.
So it's caught up into that whole system that she's talking about.
Yeah.
And one of the reports, I don't know if it was Vera or ACLU, pointed out that at that rate of growth, by the year 2030, the population of elderly people will have increased since 1981 by 4,400%.
Yes.
Wow. So if we continue on this path, that's what we're heading towards.
And currently in New York, well, as of 2004, there were, I think, close to 10,000 people imprisoned who were age 50 and above, which is 18%, I think, of the total prison population.
Sure.
And if you look at that compared to the medical parole usage, which is New York's mechanism for this type of release, there are only 30 applications for that, and the way it broke down was 1/5 died before they got a decision. 1/5 were denied, and 17 were released. So just over half. So we had, 17 of potentially eligible, if they were to broaden the eligibility criteria. So there's a pool that's really kind of ripe for examination and inclusion in the eligibility criteria. It's just getting individuals to be willing to take that chance
Yes.
and to speak up and really kind of allow these policies to be used to their full extent.
Got it. In the last couple of minutes that we have left, what are some recommendations that RAP has for members of the legislature, also for judges and other policymakers?
Yeah, one of the things we did early on after launching the project was that we fought hard to get the regulations, the parole regulations changed.
Yes.
Because we knew that it would be a much difficult fight,
Yes, yes.
although it may have been worthy to get new legislation in the form of a bill.
Yes.
And we support a bill that's currently being pushed called Safe Parole Act.
Yes,
We
yes.
do support that, but we think that meanwhile we need to be putting a lot of energy in trying to do something to get people out as fast as possible.
Yes.
And so we worked at getting the regulations changed.
Okay.
The parole, well, the regulations of the agency.
Yes.
And what we found was that there was actually a statute passed in 2011 that required, and we launched our project in 2013. And we found that in 2011 there was a statute passed that required the parole board to incorporate risk and needs assessments in their decision-making process. And they hadn't done it.
Got it.
They was pretty much ignoring that. So we made a big stink of that.
Okay.
We had a hearing up in Albany, and we pushed the requirement for them to change their regulations to incorporate risk and needs.
Okay.
And that's an ongoing fight right now because they are, for a moment, they actually did change their regulations and infuse it in their regulations, but they tried to bury it so that it was pretty much, mooted.
Okay.
And but now there's a major case going on, fighting, saying that even though they buried it amongst a lot of other factors, that those two factors should be significant in the decision-making process.
Well, we don't have much time
Okay,
left, so
then.
we want
Thank
to
you. Yeah.
wrap up. But thank you for for sharing that. That's very important information.
Yeah.
And thank you, Ashley, and thank you, Mujahid, for joining us on both sides of the bars today. And thank you in TV Land for joining us as well. If you're interested in finding out more about the Fortune Society or about the organizations that are represented here, you can look at our website, fortunesociety.org, or Facebook by typing in the Fortune Society. This is Ronald Day, and as we critically look at both sides of the bars.